to TUC0's Talks. TUC0's Talks is a leadership podcast where we talk to military leaders and to athletic coaches to try to figure out how do we take care of people and how do we learn and fail forward.
Failure is an incredible blessing because it's an opportunity to learn.
The problems and the trials that you learn from, 99% of the time, it's not you that pays the price of them.
If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backwards toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. They are not more modern, but more ancient than those of our revolutionary fathers.
Walking down the hall, and he pulled me aside. He's like, "How are you doing?" I was like, "I'm okay, sir. It's been rough, but I'm doing okay." And he said, "No, how are you doing?" And I remember don't cry, don't cry. Cause that wall was trembling, and I felt the floodgates happening. And he said to me, my voice is getting all choked up right now.
Make sure that you like and subscribe and get ready to check in with TUC0's Talks. On this episode of TUC0's Talks, I get to sit down with retired U.S. Army Colonel Shannon Whiteman and chat about the impact she had on me personally. I remember some deep conversations we had. Now she really showed leadership by looking out for her team while she was the chief of staff. Later, I stepped into the same role, and I aimed to support and uplift the team just like she did. Well, Shannon's story starts in Rockaway Township, New Jersey, where she grew up and graduated high school. After a year at junior military college, she made her way to the U.S. Military Academy and went on to serve 24 years in the Army, retiring just 8 months ago. Post-retirement, she moved back to the U.S. from Saudi Arabia for medical processing before heading to Botswana, where she and her family live now. Both Shannon and her spouse retired from the military, both making it to colonel. They have 3 kids, aged 13, 14, and 16. Even though she's technically retired, remains very busy, including her new job with an AI defense tech startup. She's also staying busy coaching track and field at her kids' school and volunteering with the U19 women's soccer team. If that wasn't enough, she's back in competitive weightlifting, representing Team USA at the upcoming Masters Olympic Lifting World Championship in Finland. Shannon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you, Chris, so much for asking me to be here. It's a tremendous honor.
Well, it's going to be fun, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation and learning as we go. And we're going to focus in on a little bit of the leadership side. A lot of the people are trying to figure out what do they need to do to improve being a leader. So let's talk about your favorite leader. And so we don't have to talk about names, but really the leadership quality. Think back to your leader that you look to, and what did that person bring to the table?
So that's a great question. I think it's a challenging question because I think throughout our careers, there's been so many just amazing leaders that we've had the opportunity to work for, peer leadership, and then obviously some of the most impactful to me have been the NCOs, right, and the junior enlisted that we had the opportunity to work with. I would say the most impactful leader is someone that I worked with at my very first duty station. So go back in the Wayback Machine, 24 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, graduating out of West Point, at that time, there was very few women at the academy. I'm thankful to see that the percentages have gone up, but at that time we graduated with about 10 to 11% women. And so while I was there, it was almost like a checklist. It was like, these are the things that you must do to be a good leader. And that was tangible things to me. It was like, crush my PT, not just max the women's, but max the men's score. Be awesome at marksmanship, be, a great land navver. I was terrible at land nav, but it was all of these things that I thought if I had a checklist and I did X, Y, and Z, my soldiers were going to love me, and this was going to make me a tremendous leader. Fast forward to my first duty assignment, poor me, stationed in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. It's pre 9/11, and I'm doing my thing. And as we all do, went through just a really tough kind of time in my life. And I realized at that moment, I felt very alone. And the person who connected with me and actually like lifted me out and motivated me to kind of just keep going from a mental health perspective was someone who didn't do any of those tangible things. She struggled with physical fitness. She wasn't really good, at marksmanship, but she had the intangibles. She was empathetic. She had the ability to understand and connect with others emotionally. She had impeccable integrity. So when she said something, you knew it was, the right thing. She always had amazing self-awareness. You didn't have to tell her she wasn't good at PT. She knew that, but she was also vulnerable and she had the ability to come forward to people and ask for help. She was a tremendous communicator. She could listen to the commander's intent, go back to her platoon and be like, okay, this is exactly what we need to do with the mission that we need to accomplish. She respected folks inside and out. And I think, again, the part that I learned the most from her was leadership isn't a checklist. It is about caring for your people. It is about being, a person of integrity. It's about those amazing communication skills. We all know the Army doesn't care about people, but people have to care about people. And I think for me, she was by far the most impactful leader of my career. She fundamentally changed what I thought a leader was. It was so moving for me because my checklist was shattered. And I realized I really needed to look internally to myself and work on those intangibles. And one of the hardest ones is being vulnerable. I think as leaders, especially coming out of somewhere like West Point and then serving in infantry brigades, being in the SOF community and JSOC, you think you have to be this wall of a person, but all that does is separate us. And what we really need from our leaders is someone who can bring us in together and say, I'm not the smartest person. You're the smartest, Chris. Or, hey, PFC Smith, you actually, you're an expert in this. Can you teach me? And being able to have that vulnerability and admit when you're wrong, I think is one of those traits that, you learn eventually. And I think I was blessed to have met somebody so early on in my career who shattered me, who shattered all of my misconceptions of what it meant to be a leader.
Gosh, my mind's racing on that when you talk about the vulnerability. When you say that word, the person that I go to is a person called Colonel Violet, and she was a commander of mine, and she did an exceptional job of being vulnerable. It never affected the leadership part of it, and nobody took that the wrong way. They just all respected her for that. Let me ask a question, because I think this is something that a lot of the leaders want to know is, do you find it difficult as a woman who went to West Point, who worked in special operations, who was in JSOC? Do you struggle with, can I be vulnerable? Will people see that as a weakness?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a balance, because what you also have to, obviously you want to command respect, and you want them to know that when it matters, you can be tough and you can make the hard decisions, specifically, obviously in combat, right? But those can be together, but it's a difficult balance. And I think we all struggle with it of how you manage to be vulnerable and be compassionate, but then still command respect. And I think what I've realized over time is I don't have to be this one person, right? I don't have to be one dimensional. I am, as we all are, these whole people with different emotions. And when I gave myself permission to be vulnerable and to say to people, hey, come in, sit down. I'm going to discipline you, or, we've got to do the hard stuff, but you're still a person and I still care about you. And I still want to make sure that your family is taken care of. And so, maybe you're not going to get, a UCMJ punishment where we're going to take all your pay away because you've got 3 kids, right? But we're going we're going to step through the difficult part of discipline, that soldiers, they react very well. They want to be cared for as a whole person. I truly believe that 99% of this world wakes up every day and wants to do the best they can, right? That they're not trying to mess up, but we all have a life, and life isn't linear, right? Like, you think when you're 18, this is what I'm going to be when I'm 45, but it doesn't go like that. It takes you in these ups and downs, and conflict is what makes, you the hero of your own story, right? So in order to be the hero, you've got to have that conflict, and that comes with making mistakes. And as leaders, that comes with communicating with your soldiers and being vulnerable and saying, like, hey, I messed up. Here's what happened to me. We're going to punish you, right? Again, vulnerability and compassion doesn't mean that we lower the standard, but I feel like it can all be together in that. But you're right, Chris, as a woman in those very male dominated organizations, it can be challenging at times. And sometimes men and women want to take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. So it is a difficult balance to strike.
So let me ask you a question, because I think, if not the best, you were one of the best at that. Like, I looked to you and would see you in the weight room, and you were crushing the weight room. And so there was no doubt about it that you belonged and you were at the table. But when I watched you take care of people, and so you were a chief of staff and working the support and going to battle for people, you had a heart that just was like, man, these are my people. There was no doubt about that. And so I think you were multifunctional and very dynamic as a person. How did you do that so well? I mean, was that intentional, or is it just who you are?
Oh, wow. So I think in life, there's moments, right, where you kind of have to figure out who you want to be. And I was in a couple abusive relationships in my time. And I had this moment multiple times, I guess, where I would look in the mirror and I'd be like, I don't want to be this person, right? This isn't who I am. This isn't who I want to be. And those are great wake-up calls. And I think when you go through tough times in life, it gives you an appreciation, right, for the good times. And it also makes you realize everyone has a story. And so, I think when people might look at me initially, oh, she's really strong, or she's tough in the weight room, like, nobody would ever, hurt her in a physical way, but they have, right? And so you have a choice. Do I want to be a victim, or do I want to be a survivor, right? Okay, well, I choose survivor. And then I want to take that and use it for good. I don't want that experience to define me and hold me back. So with that, like you said, it is vulnerability, and it's saying, okay, I'm going to love each one of these people because they all have a story that they may not want to share with me, but it's there. Everyone has a heartbreak. Everyone has something that they're going through, whether it's, a baby in the NICU, or it's somebody's mom with cancer, or it's being in an abusive relationship. And it's just being able to sit down, have the conversation, and be like, it's okay. Like, I'm a person, you're a person. Again, like, let's connect on a very real level. And what door do I need to break down for you? Like, what can I do? Like, do you need your finances fixed? Like, how can I help you? Right? Like, and the rest will take care of itself. If people know, and I appreciate you so much telling me that you viewed me in that light, because sometimes we don't know, right? Sometimes we're like, okay, am I displaying weakness? Am I spending too much time allowing people to sit and connect? And am I not doing all of the other things? But at the end of the day, those other things will get done. But what might not get done is that person might not feel connected to. They might not feel like someone took the time to listen to them. And Chris, you and I come from a generation of folks who've just deployed and deployed and deployed, seen and done really awful things. And we don't write that. That's not a badge. We've got our combat badge, but it doesn't say I have PTSD, or I might have done something that I'm not super proud of in combat. And so just having leaders, friends, peers, subordinates, just take the time to sit down and say, you matter to me. Like, we can get through this together. That's, to me, how it's come about. It's come about through some really rough experiences of my own and just trying to communicate to people you're not alone. And if nobody else, like, I believe in you and I want to fight for you.
Yeah. It's devastating that we all have stories. Some are harder than others, but out of the ashes you grow, and the resilience and how you take that and invest it back into others for other people's good, man, that's pretty awesome. So all right. Yeah. Hard to move on from that one, but we're gonna do our best. Let me ask, if you were gonna start over, like, all right, here you are in New Jersey, in small town, no zip code. You figure you're gonna go to West Point and you're gonna start the military. What would you do over? Where do you start? Where's your mindset?
So I think one of the things I didn't talk about is again, I had a very non-traditional, even Army career. So, and that started, I guess, as a child. So I grew up, I have all brothers back in the 80s, and everybody was, cheerleading and dancing. And I decided I wanted to play tackle football, right? So my dad was like, okay, let's do this. I was the first girl, like probably in my state, definitely in my hometown, to ever play tackle football. And then my mom was a little worried about me. And so she put me into pageants. And so I was like, my Miss Rockaway Township. And so I had this very strange kind of mixture of who I was from a very young age. And I feel like that's just continued in my life. So I commissioned as a medical service corps officer. I did 8 years in the medical field. And then I became a quartermaster. And then I became an operations research and systems analyst. So it's an ORSA, like a data scientist. Mm-hmm. And then I went into SOF, and then I went to JSOC, and then I became an attaché. And so I share that because I think my whole life has been defined by not being defined, by finding a passion of something that I wanted to do and figuring out how to get there, right? Like, she can't play football, she's a girl, right? And then my dad was like, fine, I will be her coach. If that's the problem, if no one wants to coach her, I'll coach her, right? And then, okay, I didn't get into West Point, so I had to, go to a junior military college for a year. And then I did medical field. And again, like, throughout my career, it was like, okay, well, I got to be in infantry brigades. I got to do really fun stuff. And then at a certain point, it was like, well, now you have to go to be in a hospital. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to be a quartermaster. And, okay, well, I got to be a data scientist. Well, now I want to go do special ops stuff. And then I want to go to so I think for me, it's that constant defining where you want to go and not to lose that. So constantly learning, innovation. I think always having like the courage to innovate, to think outside the box. That's a skill set that I don't think I was learning, but it was just innate to who I was because I had parents who pushed me outside the box. Like, oh, this makes you uncomfortable, you should do this, right? Like, oh, we've never had a girl like from our high school go to West Point, but like, you should do that. And that's just kind of pushed me throughout my career. And so I don't think I would change anything. I think I would try to be more innovative. I think in the military, a lot of times we get stuck. The regulation says we can't do this. Okay, but regulations can be changed. Regulations aren't law, right? You can always get an exception. And so I think that's one of the things that I would just, recommend to your listeners out there is, yes, regulations are guidelines. It's like doctrine, right? Like, doctrine is a guideline, but when you get into combat, we rarely did things according to doctrine. Again, it was a guideline, and you always stayed in, you made sure it was unethical, not immoral or illegal. But that's kind of also, I think, a great guideline for life, right? You kind of have your compass, but then feel free and have the courage to go outside your comfort zone. And I feel like if I could go back and do it all over again, maybe I would push those boundaries even more and try to do more and just experience all the things, right? Like, told us back in the day, we couldn't do infantry and we couldn't do, combat engineers. And thankfully all those things are open. But I feel like just encouraging young leaders to constantly think outside the box and give your soldiers that grace, give your children that grace, right? Like, let everybody make mistakes. So maybe I would have tried to make more mistakes. I don't know.
No, you start thinking through that, like if you don't have the parents that you had, the willingness to go through and say, no, we're going to try these and set that stage, you know, as leaders, there are times, the people under us are almost like our kids at times, where you have to reel them back in, but maybe loosening the reins a little bit and letting them have that freedom to make a mistake and then going forth. So I love that answer of push the boundaries even more. Like that's awesome. And I think that's something that we all need to be able to do. I've seen this and I talk about leading high potential people all the time. People who are super smart, can adjust on the fly, just have that knack and that ability to do it, and that will break boundaries. You have to lead them completely different. And it is much harder as a leader to lead them, not because of the guidance that you need to give them. It's the openness that you need to give them and the ability to take the responsibility when they fail, because high potential leaders are going to fail at a faster and harder rate than anyone else. And they have to do that because they're going to produce more than anyone else. But I love what you said. I think that's awesome. So with all of that said, what are you learning now? Because I put you pegged in the middle of that high potential. So you've got to be learning something new. What is that?
Yeah, so I think I can make the easy answer and be like, oh, I'm learning something new every day, right? But from an academic perspective, I'm actually starting my doctorate next month in in strategic leadership. And so I love that you asked me to do this, because it kind of resonated so much with me, because I was like, wow, I also am trying to constantly improve as a leader. And when I have gone back and gotten my, various degrees, my STEM degree, I have a master's degree in systems engineering and space systems. Again, it's that check the box, right? Does this equation double underline answer? And I got through it. But then when I had the opportunity to get my master's degree at the War College in International Strategic Studies, I loved it. It was fascinating to me. It was almost like where my heart was. And I got to write my master's thesis on women's rights reforms in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and then go do that, right? And go live that experience in Saudi Arabia. And so as I'm transitioning in my life, and I was like, what do I want to be? What do I want to continue to learn and grow? And I thought, sure, I could go and continue to get, hard STEM technology, go back and study artificial intelligence at that level, or I can do something that's going to impact every aspect of my life, because leadership, as you just said, isn't just about the army, right? I am trying to lead in a family environment with 3 teenagers who tell me all the time that I'm not the smartest person, and that, I might might not dress the coolest or have the best taste in music. And so trying to lead, through the varying stages of life. And then coaching in a country like Botswana, right, where the children don't have maybe all of the same things that a lot of the kids in America do. Some of them, compete in barefoot when we did some of our track and field events. And so how do I lead through that? How do I lead a different culture? How do I lead young men and young women who've had a very different upbringing from me? And how do I lead them? And so from an academic perspective, it's a long answer. Being able to go back and study and do a lot of research about different types of leadership, I think is exciting for me. And then from a personal perspective, last year I had a tumor removed out of my face. So actually I'm missing half my jaw. I'm missing 2 teeth. They had to take out my sinus cavity all the way back to the base of my brain. And so that's a huge thing to kind of overcome as well. And so what I am learning is I'm enough. I might not be perfect in any aspect of that word. My body is not going to be perfect. My leadership isn't perfect. Every aspect, we are imperfect. And that is okay. And that is what makes me a unique person. And being able to accept that, appreciate that it wasn't cancerous, right? And be able to move forward. So I'm learning how to deal with that as well. So that's a lot, Chris. That was a good question.
God, that is a lot. There's so many things. And I just think that we all need to stop and we look at people on the surface level. And so many people are doing things. And if you looked at you retired 20 years as a full bird colonel in the Army. You did so many great things. Now you're in a job that is just crushing it. You're living in a foreign country, able to coach and all these things. And you're like, wow, she just has it easy. And then you learn that you start peeling that down and everyone, it doesn't matter who you are, there's going to be something in there that you have no idea what they're struggling with. And so as a leader, you know your people, and the more you sit down, you start peeling those layers back and you start asking questions, and you're like, man, I just need to love on people. I just need to embrace them and empathize with them and figure out what's making them and what barrier do I need to break down for them so that they can be successful. Man, learning that you, whatever is underneath is okay. And it makes you different, and it builds you up to be someone who's unique, and your uniqueness of your story is what makes you such a great leader. And so embracing that is huge. What final thought do you have? What do you have for the listeners here that they could take away?
Lots of final thoughts, but I think for those that are in the Army, I think it's important for us all to remember that, or the military in general, the military isn't structured to care about its people, right? It is this huge monstrosity, and the machine has to keep turning. And so it views all of us, the military, as an industrial complex, views all of us as replaceable. They say we're government property. When the pen starts using, they toss it away and they open a new pen. So while the military can't care about us, we can care about each other, right? And so fighting for your people, understanding who your people are, like you said, Chris, like being blessed to lead such amazing young men and women, right, who have volunteered to do what less than 1% of our nation does, I think is a tremendous honor. And so having the ability to connect with them and make them feel heard, find out their passions, find out their dreams, and then don't compete. It's not about an OER. It's not about a fit rep, right? It's not about your evaluation report. If you are a good leader, all of that is going to take care of itself. You're going to work for some awful leaders, right? And the good news about the military is we all rotate in and out. So if you have to work for someone who's awful, you can learn a lot more from an awful leader, I have found, than sometimes from a good leader, right? And because you're like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person. So write it down, journal it, so you remember it when you're a lieutenant. I don't want to be this type of brigade commander. I have like 15 green notebooks that have all of these little notes to Shannon. And I love to go back and read them and sometimes find, oh my gosh, am I that person that as a lieutenant, I was like, oh, that person's awful. So I think those, things are important. And then there's room for everyone at the table. I think that's the other piece that we sometimes forget is you're stronger together. Listening to people who aren't like you is difficult. It's hard. You might hear them, but are you really listening? So challenge yourself to face your unconscious bias. One of the things, Chris, I know you went through this as well at JSOC, is those really intense psychological evaluations we go through, and having the opportunity to sit down with the doc and, the doc showing you a piece of paper of who you really are, not necessarily who you thought you were, getting some really tough feedback, and then figuring out what you're going to do with it, right? Okay, well, they say these things about me, but obviously they're wrong. Or, wow, okay, that was deep. I need to take some time to reflect on that. And how do I change this aspect of me? Or how do I face this bias that I may have? How do I become comfortable in the uncomfortable? And like you said, Chris, like leading super high powered individuals is challenging, but man, is it rewarding and fun. And I'm just so thankful to have had the opportunities that I did in the military, especially to work with folks like you. It's been a blessing.
That's awesome. So thank you, Shanna. I really appreciate you coming. Just the information that you brought and everything that you said on leadership. I think we can all just take so much of it. I know for me, I sat down and just to think on, I'm enough. I don't have to be anything. I can embrace those things that I don't do well. And that's going to be a huge takeaway. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your time because I know you're busy.
Well, thank you, Chris, again. I really appreciate and I'm honored that you asked me to be a part of this.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll go back and listen to more and just reflect on everything that we talked about. Until next time, this is TUC0's. Check it out.